legislative body of the world, the wisest, greatest, and most magnanimous people that ever lived or ever will live, forgetting and neglecting the trifling local affairs which concerned their own limits, constituted themselves into a high court and proceeded to try the nations of the earth for atrocious acts of despotism. 1850, the idea that the United States has the right to interfere in other countries because they behave badly from a U.S. or other point of view, from a U.S. point of view. 1850. Well, then you begin to understand a lot of other things, because that's what the United States has done time and time again. But when another country does that, that's not permissible. So in Syria, if the U.S. goes in to protect the so-called and support the so-called moderate opposition, and the Russians go in to support Assad, the Americans can do it, that's okay. The Russians can't. You know, where's your logic here? It's a tit for tat thing, isn't it? So, you know, that's pretty much, in my view, the answer to your, that's how I look at this issue.
Is there someone over on this side?
Are we done?
No, keep going. There's a question right over here. It'd be helpful if you would also identify yourselves before you ask your question.
My name is Rob Foreman. I work for the medical school here. I used to listen to you on Radio Moscow, so.
That was a long time ago.
See the gray hairs?
Yeah, well.
Yes. But I'd like to frame it a little differently, that I'm not so sure I perceive Americans to be hating what Russia did in interfering, although America has some of that attitude that you described, but disliking the fact that someone who is largely considered to be an incompetent president who does not have the interests of this country at heart is beholden to the Russians, even if the Russians, what they did was comparable to what the Americans have done in Central America and who knows where else. And on that basis, I guess my question is, A, do you think that analysis is accurate? And B, why not, if not? Because I don't know that it is so much an attack on what the Russians did in 2016 as on the person who seems to be in the pocket of those who did it.
Well, I would say this, that Kennedy used to say, I'll say this to that, right? I will say this. What I said initially, when I compared what Trump was saying during the presidential campaign and what Hillary was saying, it's obvious to anyone that the Russians would support Trump. It's obvious. And Americans should understand that. Not because of what Trump stands for, not because he's whatever he is, not because he wants the Supreme Court to be more conservative. Russians don't care about that. They don't even, it's not part of what they think. But they think about the relationship between Russia and the United States. And judging from what he said back then, the relationship could improve. And that's basically it, on the one hand. On the other hand, you recall as well as I do how many American senators, how many political figures said that the Russians were trying to destroy American democracy. What does that mean? How so? That the aim of the Russians was to somehow destroy American democracy. There's none of that. So I can understand what you're saying, but it really is not at all. It doesn't correspond to what Mr. Putin or the majority of people in Russia really cared about or care about today. Today, there's much less support for Donald Trump in Russia than there was. People are asking themselves, who the hell is this man? He comes here and he says one thing and he goes away and says something completely different. You know, today he says yes, tomorrow he says no to the same thing. So there are lots of questions. And there's kind of a, how should I put this? They don't take him too seriously anymore, except that he has enormous power.
My name is Alexander. I'm an undergraduate. You touched on at the beginning of your talk about how there's intense American hatred in Russia, and just now you say that most Russians would want to improve relations. Why do you think? How does that help Putin to have like very bad relations with America, or like a bad image of Americans in Russian minds? And also, do you think that this hatred is reciprocal? Like, is there a distrust of or a dislike of Russians in America?
I think the word hatred is a bit strong, and I didn't use it. I said that the attitude of Russians today towards American is more negative than it was back during the Cold War, the worst times. And I think it's mutual. And I think that that's the result of what the politicians have said, what they've done, and what the media is doing in both countries. And I think it's an issue of political will, because before Gorbachev came to power in Russia, in the Soviet Union, excuse me, the attitude was negative in this country, very negative towards Soviet Union and the Russians. You know, the Russians are coming, you know, this, that. But as soon as Gorbachev started changing things, glasnost, perestroika, da-da-da-da-da, suddenly he became Gorby. He became, you know, America's favorite guy. So I think that if there is a desire on both sides to change that attitude, it can be done very quickly. And that's why I say that we're manipulated. We really are manipulated. And we all say, well, I'm totally independent. It's not true. We make our decisions, and we come to certain conclusions because of what we read, because of what we see, and because of what we hear. So basically that's it. I would say that certainly the internet allows us to get a much broader picture. In fact, we could communicate with the other side via the internet. It's not happening very much, but it is a little bit. So that how should I put this? The ordinary citizen could do a lot to change what's happening in both countries. And it's a two-way street. And I think it's people like you, that is to say of your age, they're the ones who, for me, are the reason for optimism. Because you can do this, whereas people of my age and slightly younger can do far less. So I would hope that, you know, what I've said today might lead you to look into this. And I don't say to anyone, believe me, trust me.